we just got a package from our friends at Porterbuilt Fab, and they sent me some control arms for the front of Lucky. So you're probably asking, I thought you already had control arms from Chopping Block. You are correct. I do have Chopping Block control arms on the front of this truck. They are narrowed and forward 1 inch. But what I've found out is with my Santa Cruz wheels that are 5.5 inch back spacing, I can't turn full lock to lock without the inside of the wheel hitting the back of the control arm. I've reached out to Chopping Block. They say they've never ran into this issue. They're looking into it. But for the time being, I reached out to Porterbuilt, and they sent me these arms to try on Lucky. And these are just forward 1 inch, but not narrowed. If you already have the Chopping Block arms that are forward and narrow, all you have to do is run a 4.5 inch back spacing or less of a back spacing on those, and they'll work just fine. But with the combo of 5.5 inch back spacing or 6 if you're running transport wheels, you're going to need the non-narrowed arms to make sure you can turn lock to lock. So the next step is I'm going to open these up. I'm going to take all the parts out. I'm going to show you what comes in the Porterbuilt arms, and then I'm going to take these to my friend over at Tennessee Powder Coating and going to get them powder coated because these do come raw, but I'll have these powder coated in just a couple days. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and take off the arms that are on Lucky, and I'll do an install video of these arms onto Lucky. I'm going to do some measurements, and I'm going to compare the arms when I get those off to these arms to see what the differences are. So this is a learning experience. This is what happens whenever you're trying to bag these trucks. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn. I'm going to get these installed. I'm also going to fabricate my shocks a little bit because they're at a little of an angle and I want them to be straight up and down. So I'm going to cut off the tab. I'll show you what I'm doing with those. We'll get these installed and hopefully I can turn lock to lock. All right, I got the Porterbuilt control arms back from Tennessee Powder Coating. Jason and his team over there did a great job. These things look awesome. Ready to install those. Here in just a second, I'll put in the bushings and the rods and all that kind of stuff, show you how to do that. But first I wanted to talk about why I'm changing the control arm. So I mentioned that the back of the wheel is hitting the control arm. And I'm gonna do my best to show you. This is about where ride height would be, bag inflated. And right here, it looks like everything is gonna clear, but when I turn right there, you can see right here hits the wheel and it's not turned all the way. Now that's typical for control arms that don't have a steer stop, but this wheel is just barely turned. It's not turned hardly at all. So this would not be enough to actually turn. I went out and measured Francis and the turning radius on that truck, and there was probably about 4 more inches of turn. So that's how I know it's not right. That's the main issue, the wheel hitting the bottom of the control arm there whenever I turn. I don't want it to be unsafe, not being able to turn all the way to go places, and my nice wheels rubbing the control arm. So I'm going to switch these out with the Porterbuilt. It seems to me, if we look at one of the control arms from the driver's side, this part right here is where it's hitting. It looks like this angle is really wide compared to the Porterbuilt that kind of goes in at less of an angle right here and kind of has the ball joint out a little bit further. As you can see here, the chopping block one right here swings really far out. It's about this much further that it swings out, and I think that's the difference of turning, just that slight design. Now the chopping block control arms will still work if you have 4.5 inch back spacing or less. You're going to be able to turn no problem with the narrowed and forward arms. These Porterbuilt arms are just their forward 1 inch, not narrowed. These are kind of the standard ones you buy if you don't want them narrowed. They're all forward 1 inch. That's going to put that wheel centered, but they won't narrow them unless you ask for them narrowed. So the next step is I'm going to go ahead and pull that wheel off and get the disc brakes out of there, get the control arms off, and get ready to install the Porterbuilt ones. I've already done this side as far as taking everything apart, getting ready to install those on there. But I'm excited. Once I get these on, I'll be able to run my air lines to the back and hopefully have this truck on the ground in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to go ahead and put together the driver's side since I have everything out, and I can go ahead and install it just to get an idea. And this is the upper control arm here. Pour out all those parts, make it nice. I've got all the hardware out of the bag for the upper control arm. Now we're just going to put this together. We're going to slide this bar through the end, and then we'll put these into the ends, line up the little grease fitting, and then we will just tighten it down with the washers and the lock nuts right here. Then we'll put these on the ends to cap it off and make it look really nicely. We'll put the grease fittings in there, then we'll get them greased up and then install them on the truck. got all that installed. Not bad. Took about 30 minutes. I don't know, maybe an hour. Who knows? Too long. Took too long. Now that we have the Porterbuilt ones put together, I want to compare them to the chopping block. So I'm just going to lay the chopping block on top of it. Try not to scratch it up, but the chopping block are narrowed and forward an inch. But when you're looking at it from this angle, it doesn't look that much different where the actual ball joint is. But the part that hits right here, it's hard to show you, but the part that hits, this part right here on the chopping block, it goes all the way out here and curves around. So it's sticking out probably about 2 more inches further. So where this kind of has that sharp angle, the chopping block is doing this, and that's where the wheel is hitting on the chopping block right here. So that could be the main difference, is the design of the arm. But I'm curious to see, this is close to where the chopping block one is, but I know it's going to be different once we get everything mounted up, but we'll see. I did some measurements before, and we will install this and do some more measurements, and I'll tell you kind of what I think. As far as design goes, they have a similar design as far as they have this back piece. This has a nice angle down. It has 2 holes where the chopping block just has kind of an adjustable. So it doesn't really, I don't really have a preference there. One thing I do notice is this bottom section is welded into the front. The chopping block is kind of open right there. So that could mean this is stronger. I don't know. I think both arms are really good choices, but I'm curious to see. This shock bracket right here has a slight angle to match more of the angle from the factory or those shock relocators that I have. So that could actually be a good thing, that it's at an angle and will help the shocks that we have on there. So I left the shocks on there right now how they are, and then if it doesn't align straight up and down, then I'm gonna adjust it a little bit more. But overall, I mean, these things look awesome. I wasn't sure if you were supposed to powder coat this. I don't know if that's gonna rust or not. I kind of wanted to paint it, but I saw on a lot of trucks this isn't painted on there, so I didn't. Go ahead and install this lower control arm than the upper and see what we got. All right, before I install this other arm, I just wanted to show you, from a glance they look similar, but whenever you start to really look at them, I can see this top here is angled more, where this one's kind of flat, and the angle up from the side, this one's definitely angled further up. And like I had mentioned before, this part is not welded in. This part is all welded all the way to the edge. This is flat to the ground, where you can see this is angled out. Just a couple subtle differences, but Definitely different. They both are well built though, just the welds, the design, the tubular design. One thing that was a struggle is these come with ball joints in them, but it came with the wrong ones in it. I had to swap it out because I wasn't sure what ball joints that I had. So I swapped these out, but with this thicker piece right here, it was a real struggle to use a ball joint press to get this pressed in. And you can see on the other one, this is this size. So this is going to be a lot easier to press in a ball joint because it's smaller. It has a deep pocket, so I had to have an adapter and then an adapter up here, and I almost ran out of room with the ball joint press, even using the largest one that I could rent from Advance Auto. So just to recap one more time, these are only forward arms, not narrowed. These are forward and narrowed. You'll need 4.5 inch back spacing with these control arms to make sure they work so they don't hit right here in the back. These are just forward an inch. I'm using 5.5 inch back spacing, but I have seen people use 6 inch back spacing on transport wheels, and these worked fine. I will give you my feedback on how 5.5 inch back spacing, how much room there is in the fender. I'm used to using transports, and I know that those tuck nicely. Those are 6 inch on factory control arms, but we'll see what 5.5 do on these Porterbuilt ones. Getting late in the shop, but got the Porterbuilt arms on and they work. I can turn lock to lock without it rubbing anything. Awesome, pumped about that. But one thing that I did have to do is the McGoffey shocks that I had on there, if that's how you say it, not sure. Those that I had on there were a little bit too long. They worked well with the chopping block arms because the shock mount on the chopping block arms is a little bit lower than the Porterbuilt. So I had to go and get some of these KYB shocks. These are the ones that Porterbuilt recommends. These are the 344202. They're just like the other shocks, but they're a little bit smaller and they fit. They match my other shocks. I like how they look. But I'm just going to get under this truck. I'm going to show you what I did. I also changed a few other things. I changed the shock mount to be a little bit more upright. It still has a slight angle, but you can't get any better than what it is now. I moved the bracket around and got it as straight up and down as I can. The Porterbuilt control arms, the shock mount is a little bit of an angle to it, so that actually made it line up well. So they took that into account as well compared to the chopping blocks that were straight up and down, so it put it kind of in a weird angle. But let's check it out and I'll show you and I'll talk through kind of what I did here. All right, I currently have the truck on jack stands about where my ride height is going to be. This is a lower ride height. I'll probably have to ride a little bit higher than this to get full turn, but I can turn the wheel all the way around and still spin the wheels. So let's get under this and I'll show you what's going on. So here is the Porterbuilt arms. And again, this isn't all the way down. There's a gap here because this is kind of where ride height would be. But as I mentioned, this shock bracket right here kind of has a slight angle that lines up this shock how it is. As you can see, my old hole right here, I moved that shock bracket in and I moved it up just a little bit. That way it's at kind of an up and down angle and it looks good. I also, if you didn't notice here, these lines were around the shock because on the other control arms, the wheel didn't hit the lines because it was hitting the bottom of the control arm. But now when I push the wheel all the way in, it goes all the way almost to where the shock is. So I had to move those lines. I moved where this hole was. I moved it further back here. I moved that line back here. And then I ran those lines just right up the side of the frame right here. And I tested this up and down. It actually goes further away as I go up. So there's plenty of clearance, but I went ahead and put some of this thick rubber hosing around it just to protect it. It's in there solid. It's not going anywhere, but that will protect that. Some people were worried about that before, and the shocks are in there. They mounted up. These are the same type of shocks that I have in the back of the truck, but here is what I was talking about. So whenever I would turn, I don't know if I'm going to be able to turn this with one hand. There we go. So, I don't know if you, man, I can't even see. Okay, it's kind of hard to see here, but before, this is where the wheel would hit the control arm, and there's about 2 inches clearance of that wheel. There's clearance for the shock right here, and check that out. I can spin the wheel and there's no rubbing, and that is at a very wide turn right there, a lot more, and I've got plenty of clearance. I've got the shock in there. I moved the air line, that way it's not rubbing. See if I can get a shot from the other side. Again, I apologize for the camera angles. I know I'm flying around all over the place, but I just wanted to update everybody on this. Here's a better shot of the shock, but you can see it's more of a up and down, where before it was very angled. The bottom of the shock seemed like it was at a weird angle. So to get these React shock relocators to work, I had to grind down a little bit of the little tab that goes into your factory spring hole. Before, it was a little bit too thick. I think it was from their powder coating that they put on there, but I just ground it down a little bit, and then it slid in there, and I was able to mount it up straight up and down, and plenty of clearance over here too. You can see right here. Again, this is probably, I don't know, 6 inches off the ground, which is a good height to ride in, and then you still get full turn. You can see it's pretty low by the bag. That's about where a low height setting would be. So we're riding pretty low right here and still able to turn lock to lock, get plenty of turn on there. Hey, overall, I'm super impressed with the Porterbuilt arms. The chopping block arms would have worked just fine if I would have had 4.5 inch back spacing, but since I have 5.5 on these, the factory Porterbuilt arms, these are only forward an inch, but not narrowed, and it puts the wheel centered in your fender wells, and it gives you a little bit of clearance on the firewall, but it doesn't mess up the back and forth and the back of the wheel rubbing. So these would work with transport wheels. They'll work with 5.5 inch back spacing, 5 inch back spacing, depending on how wide your wheel is. The chopping block, the narrowed and forward, is going to be 4.5 inch back spacing. If you get just their factory ones, you could run the basic wheels the same way as this. But thanks Porterbuilt again for hooking me up. I'm really happy with these control arms. They were easy to install. They look really great whenever you get them powder coated. That's one of the perks though. I'll share it again with the chopping block. They come with the ball joints installed. They come powder coated, ready to install on your truck. So if you don't want to paint them, chopping block, that's a great option. They look really good. Just a few small changes that you have to make whenever you go chopping block. Porterbuilt, I like them. They look good. I've always wanted Porterbuilt arms on my truck, so I'm glad that I have a pair on Lucky. And this truck is almost ready. I haven't really shared any of this yet, but I've got the brake lines ran. I've got the EFI fuel tank plumbed up with the fuel filter regulator over there. And all I have to do is run the fuel pump kit, run some wires up for my sending unit. And I'm waiting for a bracket for the back for the air ride management. I'm going to mount that above the tank if I have room, but it's coming together. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys learned from my mistakes. Hey, now I know about the arms, the back spacing, how to install them. Check that off the list of experience with Porterbuilt and chopping block arms. Of course, I know how to cup them, and I know all the differences in there now. So start pulling out some of the engine stuff, get it ready to go over Zach's, wait on the air management things, and there'll be a video posting about that, the Airlift 3P, and get the bed on here and get this truck ready for C10. So that's what I'm shooting for. We got another month, but it is grind time. So stay tuned. Peace.